Hi, everyone. I am Caroline Corey. I am the writer, director, producer of the film Superhuman, The Invisible Made Visible. The film was just released a couple of weeks ago, and I think it is incredible. Of course, it's my film, but I feel that, like many of you, I have had experiences since I was 5 years old that cannot be explained by science, current science. And so my whole life has been dedicated to the study of consciousness, because through the consciousness, I was able to tap into reality, see things that in the future, know things that about people, about things that no one had told me about beforehand. And so I kept looking for these explanations. And of course, I have my own theories. After teaching and lecturing and doing all this work, I started doing experiments with scientists to validate the fact that our thoughts, our consciousness does have an effect on physical reality. But how? And that's what we do in the film. And of course, I was looking for the best top scientists in the field to come on board and help me explain and validate this phenomenon. And of course, my number one person is Tom Campbell, who is here with me today. I am so excited. Tom has been, of course, he's a physicist. He's a consciousness researcher. He's been doing this for 50 years. He's the author of My Big Toe, a theory of everything, actually, that unites mind and matter, the normal and the paranormal. His theory unifies quantum mechanics, relativity, and he really understands the big picture of the nature of reality. So, Tom, I am so excited to be here with you today. How are you?
I'm just fine, Carolyn, and thank you for this invitation. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely. And you're in my film, and you're amazing. It's almost like every quote, every bite in the film that you say is so profound. It's almost like you have to pause and listen to you again. What did he just say? Did he just say that? It's you're that sort of energy. That's what you emanate, and of course, it comes to you effortlessly because, as you told me, that you've had your own experiences. Mm-hmm. So I would love to hear a little bit about how you've had experiences that are considered paranormal, if you will. How did you get started in this field, and how those experiences shaped your understanding of reality?
Okay, well, that goes back a long way. I guess my first paranormal experiences, and I didn't actually think of them as paranormal experiences then, came to me when I was very young. I was maybe 6, 7, years old, and I was out of body, and not just a dream, but I was out floating around in my room and found out that with my intent, I could go through the wall, I could go outside, I could run through the yard, and it was just fun. Yeah, it was just a 6-year-old at play. So I had those experiences, and that's not unusual. Children about that age, somewhere between 5 and 7, often have experiences like that. And of course, when they explain them to their parents, the parents says, "Oh, it was just a dream, forget about it." So you kind of go through life and you don't really pay much attention to it. But in hindsight, it was clear that I was doing out-of-body experiences at a very young age. But then it quit, and I didn't do them for a long time until I was in graduate school, decided to learn to meditate because I thought it would help me get by with less sleep, and found out quite by accident that I could debug my software in my mind, letting the printout scroll by in my mind, and those lines that had problems with them would be red and the other ones would be black. So I just scroll through the printout. Oh, there's a red line. Back up. Let's take a look at what line's that? And I found out that it wasn't just entertaining, but it worked. When I went to my program and pulled out those lines, and this is in the old days where lines were boxes of cards, you know, with each card was a line. So in any case, I pulled out those cards, looked at those lines, and sure enough, that error that I saw was the error that was there. And that kind of blew my mind, because now I'm, you know, working on my PhD in graduate school, and this hit me probably about halfway through that process. And suddenly my reality grew, because before that, like most physicists, I thought reality was confined to just those things you could measure. If you couldn't measure it, which means you couldn't operate on it, it's called an operational definition of reality. If you couldn't operate on it, then it either didn't exist or it was irrelevant. It didn't matter anyway. If you couldn't operate, connect to it, you know, interact with it, then it's useless, couldn't possibly be real. But now here I was debugging code in my mind, and there was no way to explain that. So I suddenly had this idea that there's another whole bunch of reality, there's another whole set of reality out there that I didn't know anything about. Well, I'm a physicist, and what physicists do is model reality, right? I mean, that's what we're all about. We model reality. So I started off on a mission then to understand this other part, this new reality that I had discovered, and how does it work? What are the limitations? What else can you do with it? And what can't you do with it? How reliable is it, and why? Why does it work the way it works? So that was me probably in middle 20s. Now, by the time I was at the very end of those 20s, I had a job, and my boss gave me Bob Monroe's book. Bob Monroe, you know, I don't know all your people know about Bob, but he wrote books called Journeys Out of the Body, Far Journeys, and Ultimate Journey. Bob had out-of-body experiences. And my boss, of all people, hands me this book and asks me what I think of it. And within a couple of months after that, I was in a car with a bunch of other people going out to Bob Monroe's house to talk to the man himself, because I wanted to know, is this guy just making it up? You know, is he making it up to sell books or what? So I got to meet him, I got to know him, and he had just built this laboratory for studying consciousness, mainly studying out of body, because he wanted to put it on a scientific map. So I joined him, and I was going to be one of his scientists, and he agreed to teach me to do what he did. So I started, myself and another fellow, we started coming out there like 15, 20 hours a week, spending time in Bob's laboratory studying consciousness. So see, my career in studying consciousness and my career in applying physics both started within a few months of each other. Mm-hmm. And I continued both of those, and still do continue the consciousness research. The physics I've retired from some years back. I'm a retired physicist now. But anyway, out at Bob's, we learned to go out of body on demand whenever we wanted to. We learned to heal with our minds. We learned to remote view. We learned to gather data from databases. And we did it all with evidence. You know, it had to be evidential. If it wasn't evidential, then it wasn't worth our time to do it. Because
what does that mean? What do you mean evidential?
Well, it had to be things you could check.
Oh,
if you remote viewed something, then you had to be able to go check and see if what you got was the answer.
Right.
You know, if you were healing people, you had to heal hundreds of them, because that's statistical. You know, if you healed somebody, they may have just gotten better anyway. You know, it may not have anything to do with you. So you had to do a lot of them in order to determine what are the statistics and what kind of people are you healing. Is it somebody with a chronic disease they've had for 20 years? And after you're healing, they suddenly get better? Well, that's more strong evidence than if it's somebody that just has a headache. You know, right. Headaches come, headaches go. That's not too evidential. So we kept statistics on those kinds of things, on our getting data out of database, looking into the future, reading what would be the headline on the newspaper 2 weeks from now. You see, things like that. So they all had to be evidential things that you could check later. So after 2 years or so of that, I gave up asking the question, is it real? I knew it was real because I'd done it, you know, hundreds of times. And now the question was, how does it work? And what is it? And why does it work this way? You know, what is consciousness? And what are its limitations? Why do I get some days I'm much better at it than other days? You know, why is that? So I started to study consciousness and make a model. You know, how could I, you know, I had all these facts of consciousness from my research out with Bob Monroe. You know, I knew these are the facts of consciousness. Like, for instance, the fact of consciousness is that consciousness is fundamental. This physical reality has to be a subset of consciousness. That's because you can do things in consciousness that directly affect the physical world. But the reverse doesn't happen. The things you do in the physical world don't directly affect consciousness. They can indirectly affect it, but not directly. So the arrow of causality says that consciousness is fundamental and the physical world is a subset of consciousness. So that's just a fact of consciousness. So I had all these facts of consciousness over on this side and all the facts of physics over on this other side. Mm-hmm. And my job was to make a model that tied it all together, explained it, explained all the outstanding questions and paradoxes and so on in both physics and in the metaphysics and in the paranormal, that it would all come with one simplified, you know, explanation. One simple, it has to be elegant, you know, it has to have very few assumptions and it has to be an elegant solution. And that's basically what I did then for about 35 years. And then I decided I knew a little something about it. I ought to write it down. So I started writing the books, which made me learn a lot more, because when you put something in writing, you have to be very specific. When it's just in your mind, it can be fuzzy, and you're okay with fuzzy because you sort of know what you mean. But writing forces clarity. Right. So by the time I wrote the books, then my model it actually was a model of consciousness. And it wasn't but a few years after that that I realized that that same model explained quantum mechanics. Yes. Why quantum mechanics work that way. You know, why is it that particles are best described as probability distributions? I mean, we know that's true as a physicist, but I know that's true, but nobody knows why that should be true. And of course, I can derive from first principles why that has to be true and why the speed of light is a constant, why it has to be a constant. Again, something we know is true, but we don't know why it's true because nothing else works that way. There's nothing else that has this constant speed all the time. So it solved that and a dozen other mysteries inside of physics, like what is time? Where does that come from? What is space? Right. What's mass? You know, what is spin? What is charge? You know, all these things are very basic things in physics, that all the rest of physics is made up of these fundamental things, but we don't really have any idea where they come from. They just are.
Right. Observable, measurable, but we don't know what they are. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know where they come from. But with this model, then I could explain where they all come from, just exactly what they are and where they come from. So it just started filling in the blanks for me. Matter of fact, when I first watched Superhuman, I got another data point that I didn't have before. Your movie gave me a good data point. And that is, you know, I understand how, you know, the mechanism of you raising and lowering pH. And I understood the mechanism about how you make the little pinwheel go around inside the jar, you know, with the telekinesis. And I looked at those telekinesis things on YouTube. They've been around for 15 years or so, people doing this sort of thing. And when I looked at it, I understood how it worked. I thought I did, but, you know, I didn't have any proof that I was right until I saw the Superhuman movie. And that is the way I look at that is my theory says that intent, focused intent, can modify future probability within the uncertainty that's natural to the event that's going on. So you can change pH in water because pH in water really isn't a fixed constant thing.
Correct.
If you measure it in a tiny little, you know, cubic nanometer, you'll find that that cubic nanometer has a different pH all the time, and it's going up and down and up and down. And you can, that's the uncertainty. So with your intent, you can bias that uncertainty. Let's say you're trying to make it go up. You can just raise it a little. And then that's the new normal. Then you can just raise it a little more because you still have that uncertainty. And then you can raise it a little more. So you can just step it up to the point that you can make massive changes in pH, like a whole pH. Well, the thing with the little pinwheel inside the jar going around that is the same way. There's air in there, and the air is not all at one pressure. If you had a little nanometer measurement device, you'd find the pressure changes all the time. There's randomness in there. Your intent can modify that air pressure so that it builds up on one side of that little pinwheel more than the other with your intent to do that, you see. But I was thinking, and this was probably a decade ago, and I thought, but if you pumped all the air out of that jar, you got rid of all the air, it wouldn't work. You wouldn't be able to do it anymore because you now reduce that randomness. Randomness doesn't have much air to work with. I mean, you're never going to get it perfectly evacuated, but the little bit of air in there wouldn't have those kinds of fluctuations point to point because there'd be very little air in there and the fluctuations would be very small. So I might not say you couldn't do it, but it would be extremely hard to do it and probably make it impossible for most people to do that. And on your show, you talked to that gentleman who was doing that, and you mentioned to him, well, could you do that if you evacuated the air out of the jar? Yes. And he said, not only would you get, less effect, you'll get no effect. Yes. There's absolutely no effect. And when he said that, I said, yes, just what I predicted.
But we were able to do it though. We were able to, so we still did the telekinesis under vacuum. So that's what we demonstrated in the film. So I gradually built it up in the film. First, we showed it, on its own, then under a glass. And of course, there's heat also that changes. Right. And there's air molecules. But then, light. But then we went to do it under vacuum. So he said it should be technically impossible, but we still did it. And that's what we're trying to resolve.
But did you find that it was harder?
Yeah, that's my question to you. Yeah. So not only we did it, but I also did it long distance.
Sure.
Which is crazy. I mean, although distance doesn't mean anything in quantum mechanics, we already know non-locality, but still. So yeah, I would love to answer that question about the difficulty. So what I noticed doing experiments is it depends on the target. So when I would work, for example, with water, like you said, or DNA or something that is more biological, let's say, I would feel that my intent would instantaneously trigger the effect. Like it's almost like as soon as I thought it, it happened. And so I could feel as if it was part of me, and because of that, it responded almost before I had the thought, which is crazy. When I tried to work with a computer, for example, an electronic device, try to make it go up or down or something like that, or an electrical device, it felt like when I focused on it, it felt like I was pushing it. It was a different reaction and a different approach almost. And so in order to have a measurable effect. But when it came to a piece of paper or a physical object, it was completely different. The reaction was, I could feel a resistance. Like, I'm not collaborating with you. I'm not cooperating with you. It's almost like I can do this on my own. Your intent is too strong. Back off and I will do it. It's very bizarre. Does that even make sense to you?
Yes, it does. But I'd like to ask you, how good was your vacuum? Was it a really, really strong
Yes.
I would say then that, like I said, it's not necessarily impossible, but it's just going to be a lot harder to do that, to manipulate that little bit of air that's left inside there in order to make that go around. And if you could get a perfect vacuum, it may be impossible, but of course, nobody can ever make a perfect vacuum. So there's always going to be a little air to work with. Well, the reason that some things are harder than others is that the amount of uncertainty that's available for you is different. In water and pH, it's really a measure of how many H plus and OH minus molecules there are in the solution. Well, water is breaking down into H plus and OH things and recombining, and you have a lot of things going on in the water. And the uncertainty there is much greater. So you have more room to work with. It's easier to do it. And it works rather quickly.
Yes.
You're just creating more of those in an event it's a statistical, probabilistic event of how many H pluses are in there. Water can produces that. So it's natural in water. You have H pluses and OHs, and the amounts go up and down. So when you're trying to move something, trying to move those things with changing the air pressure behind them a little bit, then that is a much harder thing, because before you're just making those statistics bias a little bit. With the pressure behind a pinwheel spinning, you're not just trying to bias the pressure in a direction, you're trying to take that pressure and move it to a particular location.
Yes.
You see, that's different. And now you have to move it behind the sides you're trying to push. And that's much different. Otherwise you're just saying, okay, I'm biasing up a little. That's good, biasing up a little. But now you have to bias it in the sense you have to build up the pressure, but you have to locate it as well. And that pushback you felt was that it naturally doesn't want to do that. It wants to equalize itself all over. It doesn't want to find itself, on one side of a jar. So you've got two things to do. You've got to, you're working with the uncertainty, but you're also have the extra job of putting that result right where you want it.
Yeah. But here's the question to you, though. Do you believe? So, of course, it was a Faraday cage, so as sealed and as isolated as possible. And we also measured the temperature. We thought, just in case the temperature had something to do with it, we were able to control the temperature, and we saw no correlation whatsoever. Even if there was a bit of increase, it wasn't strong enough, like you're saying. So no air, no electromagnetic, no temperature, and yet I'm able to shift it in a big way in the movie. I mean, it was like going like crazy. So do you think, so basically what you're saying is you're still kind of working with the laws, the natural laws of the universe, so to speak. Your consciousness is interacting with the air molecules and making them move this way or that way.
Yes.
But my question is, what if there were no air molecules? Do you think consciousness can create? So am I moving these air molecules because I'm assuming they're there and pushing them from here to move the paper, or I'm assuming there is no air and my consciousness has the ability to create air molecules somehow? Okay,
well, you can create things, and that is also a possibility. It's just much harder. So it goes, there's different levels of difficulty. When you have a jar full of air, well, now that's a way by which you can modify future probability to make that little thing spin. You get rid of most of the air. Now it's a little harder to do because there's not quite so much air there. And actually in another way, it might be a little easier to do, because when you try to actually put it behind one side of the thing to push it, that it would have less, it would be easier for it to stay there a little more. It wouldn't have so much bouncing around, knocking it around as you would have if you had more air there. So in a way, it's a little harder. In a way, it's a little easier. So just making, if you had a total and complete vacuum, you wouldn't be able to change it in that way. Now you'd have to actually change it just by completely relocating the little spinner here and here and here and here as it turns around. You'd have to it basically is, it's not here, now it's over here, now it's over here. So you're just changing where it is. You're taking it, disappearing it from here and reappearing it next and next and next. So in that way, you could create the motion, but now that's a lot harder to do.
Well, it's so interesting you said that, because, we're working with graphs, so one time when I was focusing on it, I could literally see it was exactly what you said. It was pixels that were disappearing and reappearing, disappearing, reappearing. And that day, the graph was more like a little, like, it wasn't a smooth graph, but it was more like a little, you know, like a little steps, you know. And we thought, that's interesting. We've never had that before. And so I told Mike Willicke, I was working with, I said, it is because I was visualizing that there's no air, and I was uncreating and recreating, uncreating and recreating, and each time in a new position.
Yes. You
so
see,
I mean, it's crazy. This is exactly what you just said.
Yeah. And in a way, you're still working within the uncertainty. It's just now your uncertainty isn't in air pressure. Now your uncertainty is in position. So if you put this thing in a position, let's say, here's your little thing that, yeah, it's very counterintuitive. I move my right hand and the left hand goes up, right? Yeah, it's kind of hard to use your hands in this, but anyway, there's uncertainty in its position. And you can bias that position such that it basically disappears from here and reappears there, and then disappears from there and reappears here as it rotates. But the uncertainty is smaller now, because the uncertainty in a position is much smaller. So you're going to have to work harder at it, and you're going to have to work longer at it. Whereas the uncertainty, say, in the pressure at any particular place, when the thing's full of air, well, there's more uncertainty there, and it's easier for you to work with it. So there's lots of different ways you can accomplish something. And the main difference is going to be, how much uncertainty do you have to work with? So you go from air pressure uncertainty to position uncertainty. And yes, you can do it either way. So you're just good at this. So you maybe don't notice so much how much harder it is. But I bet you'd find that fewer and fewer people could do it, say, in a vacuum.
Yeah. So I was, in the beginning, I was trying it out myself, because I didn't know, what do I do, especially long distance. Like, so, I mean, even though it doesn't really make a difference, but it kind of does make a difference in the sense, at least psychologically, you're like, you know, if it's right here, maybe it's my electromagnetic field interacting, or, you know, adding and enhancing. I'm just saying, you know, but long distance, there's like no way. And so I thought this day, on that day, I was working with time and space. I was focusing on, like what you're saying, it's the location. I was focusing on shifting the time and the space that are attached to this piece of paper, that are relevant to this piece of paper. And I kept saying, how long is it going to take me to move it from here to here? And I would get like 20 minutes. And so I would say, okay, 20 minutes. So I would just visualize it, that it would gradually disappear, appear, disappear. So I was working with time, space component, and having my consciousness shift it so that it appears there. You know, whereas before, it's exactly what you said. I would focus on reinventing or recreating or amplifying whatever air molecules were there. So all this to say that there are different ways and different technique. But in terms of the nature of consciousness, this tells me that you are literally, can I use the word manipulate? I mean, you're literally manipulating time and space. I mean, and the natural elements of the universe. Do you agree with that?
Well, yes, but when you look at it from the viewpoint that this reality that we have here is a rendered reality, it's a virtual reality created in consciousness. It was not programmed, it was just evolved in consciousness. And when you render something, you know, there's always uncertainty. You know, in a computed reality, you have pixel sizes. And you get smaller than a pixel, and it's not defined. There's uncertainty as to just where it is. So there's always uncertainty in everything at some level. If there's lots of uncertainty, like the pH of water, because there's OH minuses and H pluses coming and going all the time, well, that's easy. But trying to actually move a position of something, that's harder. And some people can do even more, can we say more flagrantly let's say, avoid the rules or go by the rules, they can make something disappear someplace and appear some other place. You know, just like teleporting things around. It'll move from the desk over to the floor, and that's a different thing altogether. But all of this can be done. It just, some of it is more difficult than others. Some of it takes more time and more practice. Some of it requires a mind that is more conditioned to approaching it from the right direction. You know, attitude is everything. If you have the right attitude and you can put your mind into a space where you don't have a lot of extraneous thoughts, it's a clear, focused space, and it's all in the intuitive side, not in the intellectual side. If you have your mind in the intellectual side, like I'm going to try to make this happen, it'll never happen. You have to work from the intuitive side. And it takes time to develop your intuitive side, but you obviously have done that. And you have a well-developed intuitive side because you intuitively knew that when there was air in there, you were going to push it with the air. And when there wasn't air in there, you were going to change its position.
Right.
And that's how it works. But you got that intuitively. So these things work in intuitive space, but they have effects that are right here in our physical reality. So yes, you are changing things. Your intent modifies future probability. This reality is a probabilistic reality. It's not a hard, fixed thing that we think it is. It's a probabilistic reality. And within that, the uncertainty around those probabilities, you can do all sorts of miracles.
So there's the nuance. So yes, because I've been, again, working with this for a very long time. Even when I was a kid, I would like see what's on the other side of the wall and I would move it around and things like that. So, but all this to say that you can train yourself, and I'm hoping the film will, because we did bring people who had never done anything before and we taught them how to do it and they were able to do it. So this is, I'm hoping the film will encourage people to not look at me or just a few people who have trained, that's only them. The idea anybody can do this. But I do want to ask a very important question. Are we actually changing it, or are we, I don't know how to say this exactly, creating the future now? In other words, you know, if in 20 minutes it's going to be here, am I already knowing that it will get there? Or does that make sense? Or for example, when you are debugging the computer program, were you seeing already what you are going to see? Or did your consciousness actually create it?
Your consciousness creates it in the sense that your intent modifies the future. See, the future is a probabilistic future. It's not a fixed future. It's probabilistic. It's not a done deal yet. And we have free will, so that future can change based on what we do and the choices we make. But it's not just about us, you know. Rocks roll downhill, you know, it rains sometimes, and all of this has probability associated with it. So you can modify those probabilities. Now, it doesn't mean you can always get what you want, but you can modify things to make some things more probable and other things less probable just with your intent. So in that sense, you're creating a reality that matches your intention. So you're the creator. But see, we're all creators in here in this reality. Like if I want to make sure that the sun is going to shine, you know, next week because I have a picnic scheduled, then I can use my intent to make that happen, to, you know, raise the probability of it being sunny that day. But somebody else is planting grass and planting crops, and they want it to rain. So they're using their intent to make it rain. So all of our intents, they're all pushing and pulling in different directions, and all of that adds up together. And then what happens as a result of all of that.
I want to talk about this because this is huge and how we are all collectively creating. But I want to play a clip from the movie of you speaking, which will kind of lead us to the next conversation. I'm just loving this. I mean, you're just so incredibly eloquent, and you make so much sense. You know, it's like, because we know this is real. We have intuition. Stuff happens all the time. And no matter how many times you dismiss it as synchronicity, there are laws that govern these phenomena. We just don't know all the laws. And I know you're working on experiments, which I'd love to hear about. But let's play this this clip real quick for everybody to watch. 1 second.
We see physical reality, and we think that we are physical bodies walking around in this physical reality. What we are is consciousness. We are pieces of consciousness playing avatars in a virtual reality game called this physical world. So a conscious comes here with no memory. So when it logs onto its avatar, that avatar is all it knows. So all of its experience is experienced with that avatar, with that fetus, with that newborn. This is an apple, this is mama, you know, this is the door, this is my house. It just learns how to interpret the data. What's really happening is that the computer is sending this individuated unit of consciousness a data stream. That's how reality is created. The particle doesn't exist, you see, until some player gets that information of the particle being there in their data stream. Once that's done, it has to stay there. It has to, it has to be a particle from then on. So it acts like a particle. That's what brings it into this reality. It becomes a part of the physical world. Then anybody else that looks there will see that same thing.
That's exactly what we are talking about, that if we are always creating and changing the probability, then how come certain things are already in existence? In other words, every time we look up to the sky, we see stars. We didn't just invent the stars just now. You know, every time we go out of our house, we see the same street or whatever. We didn't just create it. So how do you explain that?
Well, it's really easy to explain, but it's hard for some people to get their arms, their mental hands around it. You talk about things are created in your mind, and you get the idea that, well, what if everybody in this small town just all went to sleep at the same time? Then does that mean, the courthouse would disappear, all the trees and the rocks and everything would disappear while they're asleep, and then they'd come back? No. The trees and the courthouse and the rocks were never there in the first place. You see, it's not that they exist and then they don't. That's a person trying to make a physical reality in their mind. They never existed. They only exist in the minds of the players. So our reality exists only in the minds of the consciousness players. Now, let me give you an example that'll make that clearer. Let's talk about a virtual reality game like The Sims. Okay, it's a virtual reality game. Now, you are the Sims character's consciousness. Let's say you're playing this Sims character. You're the Sims player's consciousness. You get to make all that player's choices. Right? You make the choices, sit down, stand up, go to the refrigerator, get a beer, go out, get a job, whatever. You make all those choices for it. Okay. You're that Sim character's consciousness. The Sims character is just a virtual character. It doesn't exist on its own. It's just calculated in a computer someplace, put on a screen for you to look at because it helps you visualize your choices and what your choices are doing. Okay. So what about that Sims game? Where is that Sims game? Does it exist someplace? That Sims map with all those houses and swimming pools and bars and cars, where is it? It doesn't exist. It only exists in the minds of the players. See, and only when something happens, the players get data. The computer, the server of Sims sends you, your computer, data. that computer turns it into little dots of light, pixels of light, and you, the consciousness, look at all those little dots of light and say, oh, that's a tree, that's a refrigerator, you know, that's my friend Joe. And you do all that interpretation from these little points of light because you've learned how to do that as an infant. Okay, so you actually receiving data, you interpret the data, and then you send information back to the computer. Oh, I'd like to stand up and, you know, walk over to the refrigerator. So you send that, then the computer takes that, shows your figure standing up and walking over to the refrigerator. So it's just a data exchange between you and the computer. There is no Sims reality. And until the computer sends you information that says, oh, that's a rock, that's a river, you know, that's a car, then the car isn't there. The car never was there. The car doesn't exist, has never existed, along with the rocks and the refrigerators and all the rest of it. Only exists in the minds of the players. And until the computer sends some data to you, then there is no reality. So here, all these people in the little village are all asleep. What happens to the trees and the rocks? Well, they never were there. The reality is just in the minds of the players. And their bodies are like the Sims character. Their bodies are just some graphical arts, if you like, to let the consciousness know what's going on. So if you think of it with that parallel, then that tends to make sense. We are consciousness. We're not physical bodies. And we have an avatar, and we're making all the choices for that avatar. So it's just like any other virtual reality video game. But we have to stop thinking of ourselves as flesh and blood, you know, bodies, and we have to think of ourselves as consciousness. And this whole reality is a virtual reality. It's a consciousness evolution trainer, and that's who we really are. Consciousness. We're immortal. When that avatar dies, we don't die. When your Sims character dies or gets run over by a bus or something, you know, you may go, oh, darn, now I'm gonna have to start over with another character, or maybe you can resurrect that character, however the game is made, but it doesn't affect the consciousness any. So we see ourselves as consciousness, not as bodies, and a whole lot of things will become clear.
Yeah, but what you're saying though, so it's in my mind that there is, you know, it's trees outside and houses and the street and my car is parked outside. But if we're all seeing the same thing, so what you're saying is that a data stream is coming to all of us collectively, and we're all experiencing the same thing. That's why when we all look at the sky, we all see the same star, we all see the moon or what have you.
Yes, that is correct. It's a multiplayer game, just like The Sims. In The Sims, you're sitting there and some other character who's sitting in the same room with you gets up and they go to the refrigerator and they pick up a beer and walk over and hand it to you.
But well, how does it become common like that? Like how come I get to see the refrigerator as white and with two doors, and then they see the exact same thing? Why wouldn't they see it as, you know, black with one door?
Because once the data comes into the reality, then it has to stay in the reality. It doesn't change. So once you see something, you know, once that data, so when the computer sends you a data of a white refrigerator, it's got to send that same white refrigerator to everybody, whoever walks in that house, whether they're there at the time or not. In other words, that then has become a part of this virtual reality. And it can't just change around, because that would make the virtual reality crazy. You know, it'd be like, you know, being in one of those fun houses, the mirrors that make you, you know, skinny and fat and different things. Life would be too difficult to work if things kept changing. So the rule is that once something comes into the reality, it stays that way in the reality. And here's an example. Take a physicist with who looks at outer space with a big telescope, and he's looking at a piece of space that's never been seen before, something new, better telescope. So he's looking at something brand new. He looks at it. There may be 1,000 different things that could be there. And of course, it'd have to be something that wasn't too unusual, you know, something that fit in with the other kind of things around it. but there's 1,000 different things that could be there. A random draw is taken from the probability distribution of the possibilities, and that's what he sees. Now, once he sees it and his camera takes a picture of it, anybody else looks there, they'll have to see the same thing because the system now has that noted. It was seen. This was what, even though it was one of 1,000 things, and it just picked this one, from now on, that's it. That's there. And anybody else looks at any other time, that's there. Unless all that information in the system gets lost. Let's say the guy who took the picture, there's an earthquake and his telescope and he and the picture and everything gets swallowed up. So it's not available anymore. Now, another physicist with a similar kind of telescope, he looks there. It doesn't have to be the same thing that guy saw because that information's no longer in the reality. That information came to the reality, left the reality. Now that second physicist will have a random draw from a probability distribution of the possibilities, and that's what he sees. And from now on, everybody will see that, and it may not be the same thing. You see, so once information comes, as long as that information is here, and everybody in this little village knows where the courthouse is, and the trees, and the rocks, and the stream, and the river 10 miles away, everybody knows that. So that's the way it is always going to be for everyone because it's a shared reality. It's a multiplayer game. And the computer does that just to keep things consistent.
Makes perfect sense to me, honestly. But I want to ask you about how the computer computes the data. That's one question. But I really, really, really want to jump to the big question, which is, who's the computer?
Okay, the computer is our consciousness. What I call it is the larger consciousness system. Okay, there is this larger consciousness system of which we are a part. Okay, we're a piece of that larger consciousness system. You and I call us individuated units of consciousness. So there's this big system and it breaks itself apart into pieces because that gives it more things that it can do, more states that it can be in. Just like cells broke themselves into pieces and makes a multi-celled thing rather than just a single-celled thing. More complexity gives it more capability and more adjustability. So it did the same thing. So we are individuated units of consciousness, you see, and we are part of this larger consciousness system. And you can, if you want to, you can just call that system source. I know some people that call that system God, but it's just source. It's not a magic system. It's a real system. It has limited numbers of bits to work with. It has, time. It can't process, but so fast, but so much. So it's a real system. It's just consciousness. And it evolved this virtual reality that we call our physical universe. It evolved it. So it's not that it programmed it. It evolved it from a rule set and a set of initial conditions that let it evolve until this is what we got. And here we are. And now we, individuated units of consciousness, can log on and play a character in that virtual reality so that we get to make choices, important choices, choices with consequences that help us evolve. And as we evolve, consciousness system evolves because, we're part of it. So our evolution is its evolution as well. We share that evolution. So that's what it's all about.
But which came first? Did the source system invent or create individual units of consciousness, or the individual units of consciousness created or made up this one system?
Well, it has to go with the simpler, and the larger system being created first. So we have the larger consciousness system first, and that started as just a cell of consciousness. And all it takes to be consciousness is you have to have memory, you have to be able to process, you have to be able to have feedback, and you need a purpose of some sort so that you know whether you're evolving or de-evolving. So you start out with this very simple singular cell of consciousness, and then you just let it evolve. And as it evolves, part of its natural thing to do is to break apart and interact, have all those parts interact with it and with each other, because that gives it so much more that it can become when it does that. So that's kind of the natural progression. So it starts as a simple consciousness. Now, the question always comes, well, where does that simple consciousness come from, right? Yeah. I put that in my book as an assumption that consciousness exists. So I start with that as an assumption because it's going to be logically impossible for us to get information on that source of that first consciousness cell. And that's because we are consciousness. That's what we are, individuated units of consciousness. And we can't get outside of the consciousness system to see how the consciousness system got started. You see, we're stuck inside. So when you're inside the system, the origin of that system is going to be a mystery, because you can't get outside of what you are in order to see. And if you don't have that perspective of being outside, then you can't really ever know for sure how it got there. Now, there is some conjecture, and the conjecture is that you have little simple programs called cellular automata, which are simple little instructions that then tell things how they interact, and it just repeats and repeats. These cellular automata can be configured to do all the things that a general purpose computer does, but they can start out very, very simple. They can move information, they can do AND and OR gates, they can do all sorts of things. They can move information from one place to another. So they're very interesting little things. They're very simple. And you match that up. That's a kind of a new mathematics, the cellular automata. You can match that up with another set of new mathematics that says that if you have a system and that system has potential to be something or do something, if you wait long enough, it will be it or do it. In other words, it's a probability thing. And those two together say that if you have this potential, now again, you have to start with a potential. So you have to start someplace. So if you have this potential, eventually that potential would create a very, very simple little cellular automata, which would eventually evolve into consciousness. You see, it has all the right properties to be able to do that. And if your readers or your viewers here would like to follow that, go to, let's see now if I get this right. I was going to say Berkeley, but I don't think it's Berkeley. One of the big schools out in California. Maybe it'll come to me in just a minute. Pardon?
Stanford?
Perhaps. Anyway, I'll think of it maybe later. But if you go to their philosophy department, they have a lot of things up on the web. And if you go look on cellular automata, they will have 30 or 40 or 50 pages just on that possibility of cellular automata and this idea that potentials can develop themselves, stable things out of statistics, just out of probability, if they have the potential to do it. So there's lots and lots of people who've thought about that and considered it. But that's just a hand-waving argument. We in physics say hand-waving when we mean it's just conjecture.
Right.
That's not solid. It's just conjecture. So it has to be conjecture. Logically, you can't get anything more solid than conjecture because we are consciousness. We can't see our own beginning. So that's why I start just with the assumption. I have only two assumptions in my work. One, that consciousness exists, and two, that evolution exists. And that's it. Everything else then is derived from those two.
And these laws, these rules, let's say, the rules of the game are inherent within the system. And so because we are part of the system, then they're part of us. And that's how we are evolving or creating. So now that's why we can make individual choices. So just to bring it back to the individual purpose of existence, if you will. So, and also, I do want to talk about one of the one of the demonstrations we have in the film, which is the blindfold. because it brings up all kinds of possibilities. I wanted to just shift gears a little bit and ask you about that, because I know you, I think, tried it yourself, trying the blindfold. How can you break these rules? And because normally we see with light, we need light to see the physical world. If there's no light, then you shouldn't see. So how is your consciousness able to break these rules of the system?
Okay. It can, you are consciousness, remember, not a physical body. As consciousness, you have access to all the information and things that are in consciousness, in the consciousness system. You're not limited to just the physical, your consciousness. So there are databases out there. I call them databases. It's a collection of information that are necessary for the system to render this virtual reality game we call our physical reality. So in order to do that efficiently, it needs to develop these databases. So it has databases, and that information, there's a probable future. Remember we talked about we modifying future probability? That one of those that database is a probable future events, which lets the system know what it has to do next, most likely, so it can get prepared for that before everything isn't a surprise. So it's got this data, and what those children were doing when they had the blindfolds on but could see is that they were remote viewing. And they were remote viewing in real time. So they were remote viewing what's here in front of me now, and now, and now, and now, and remote viewing in real time. And that data is all in the database. It's in the, it's all available to them. So that's how remote viewing works. You just collect data out of the database. That's how people see auras and get information on people. And, they feel other people's feelings. They're getting data out of the databases. And the database, like I say, is required for the system. So that's what's going on. Yes, I took a course. I took a course in that.
I know. I want to get your opinion. How was your experience?
Oh, it was a quick course. It was just 5 days, which wasn't long enough. Out of that 5 days, I learned all the things that I wanted to learn. I came there. I knew what was going on. It was remote viewing. And I know how hard it is to teach somebody to be a good remote viewer. And I saw that these people were teaching children to be excellent, super remote viewers, remote viewing in real time, and they were doing it in just a few days. And of course, if you are less than 11 years old, older, somewhere between 5 and 11, you can learn if you're 11, maybe it takes you a few weeks, but if you're 5 or 6, you can learn in a few hours. It doesn't take long to learn how to do this. So I wanted to know, how are they teaching people to remote view in real time in a week, or kids, in hours? And I found out how, and it was really very, very interesting what was going on. So I just wanted to just follow directions. I didn't want to try to do anything or do it my own way or add anything to it. I just went there to follow directions, do what they say, and see what happened. And I did. And, it was interesting, very interesting. So it took me about 3/4 of the way through the course before I got it, what was going on. And very interesting thing is they had these masks that you just showed around, and I had mine, and I had it pulled real tight so no light could get in. And the instructor came around and said, well, you need to loosen that up a little bit. I said, but if I do, light will get in. And she said, that's okay. We need a little bit of light to get in. And I'm going, aha, here's the cheat, right? We're really going to get light in there. And anyway, what I found out is that by the end of the course, about half of, this is all adults now, no children. About half of the adults were able to read with their masks on, read without eyes. Well, maybe a little less than half, but quite a few of adults. I had one lady, I was walking around and I walked her out in the street, because who knows, maybe these are the books with these words on that people have already memorized or something, right? So I walk her out in the street and I said, how many garbage cans are over there? And she's got this mask on and I know she can't see them. And she says, oh, there's 5. And I said, what color's the house? And she told me. And I said, what's that license plate? Can you read it? what's the little URL under the bottom of that license plate? And she could read that too. You know, here's a notice was put up on a door. Said, read that to me. So these were things that nobody would have known what they were there. They're just things in the neighborhood that I was walking around. She obviously was reading very well, could see very well with her mask on. But she had little bits of light coming around the edges. But of course, that doesn't help you see. That means the light comes in and it bounces to the mask and bounces to your skin and back to the mask and eventually works your way into your eye. That's unfocusable light. That's not light that you could ever turn into an image. You see?
Right. Yeah, because in front of you is still dark.
Yeah. Well, it's not only in front of you is dark, but the little bit of light you see is not direct from anything. Exactly. In other words, you can't see the wall behind you now. Even though light is bouncing off the wall behind you, hitting the wall in front of you, and then going into your eyes. But you can't see it. Yeah. Because once it hits the wall in front of you, it loses its information. Once it hits something else, you have to have the light going directly from the object to your eyes for you to see it. It can't bounce anyplace in between. Well, this little bit of light that gets in there wiggles its way through the mask, and it's totally useless at being able to see anything. But it let her believe that she was cheating. And I asked her, I said, well, how, you know, what's it like, you know, doing it? Because I wasn't at that point yet, you know, and I said, well, you know, what is it? And she says, I'm cheating. There's light coming in, and that's how I'm able to see. Well, I've had this mask on for days, and I know you cannot see through that mask. And yes, I know there's lights coming in the back, but that's all irrelevant because I'm a physicist, and I know that that little bit of light will never resolve into a picture of anything, much less reading a license plate, you know, in a car in front of you. So, but she was convinced that she was cheating, which is why she was able to do it, which is why they had to let the mask a little loose so that people could justify the fact that they were doing it. This is why 5- and 6-year-olds can do it in a few hours, and adults take a much longer time. All the adults that were in our group that were techies, you know, engineers, you know, scientists, math people, all the techies had problems and didn't do very well. They had the problems because, you see, they were applying their intellect to the problem, for one, which is an issue, but they had a belief at a deep level below their conscious mind that this is impossible. You can't see if there's no light. You can't do it. And if you believe you can't do it, then you can't do it. Exactly. So a 5-year-old, they don't have a beliefs like that. Yeah, put a mask on. You tell me I can read. Oh yeah, there it is. You know, they can read because they don't have this big belief problem. Now this lady and everybody, by the time we were done, everybody in the class who was reading, and you know, we helped each other. So I worked with all the various people. They worked with me. All the people who were able to read and to see with their mask on all claimed that they were cheating. But what it was is they were not technical enough to know that they couldn't be cheating. Right, that little light that came in was irrelevant, had nothing to do, could not possibly form an image. Right. You know, that was just, so it was impossible for them to cheat. But if they thought that they were cheating, that opened up the possibility that they could do it. And let them do it. And that kind of came toward the end, and I got it, and I said, that's what's going on. That's why adults can't do it. It's because they believe they can't. And you give them some way that they can intellectually get around and justify it, then suddenly they can do it. But you know, like I say, I walked with this lady on my arm, and she didn't need to hold onto my arm. She could see just about as well as I could, but I walked her around on my arm. And I had just days of wearing that mask, and I knew exactly the kind of light that would come in around that mask. And if you were actually going to see something, that mask would have been way up here or way down here or way around there. I mean, it had to be obviously moved before you could actually see anything. Yeah. And go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So we just taught a class online because, you know, with the situation right now, we can't do it live, and for kids. And after 2 sessions, they were able to read and do puzzles and everything else. So absolutely, the kids just do it. They don't question, but adults are like, wait. So they do need to justify. Because actually, when I wear the mask and it's very tight and there's no light, and then some light starts to come through, especially peripheral, on the peripheral side, the first thing that comes to mind, wait, is it leaking? Am I cheating? Is it off? Because your logical brain is saying it's impossible. But in the movie, as you saw, we showed all kinds of people from all around the world, young kids, adults from Russia, Romania, the UK, all over, also in Utah. And they all actually teach the technique slightly differently. In fact, the people in Utah teach it very differently. It's based, and they also train the people with the eyes closed, like shut closed with tape. And the mask on top of it. So it's absolutely insane. And they're able to completely navigate. And so also in the movie, because I was trying to bring as much science and credibility, we introduced that scientific team, you know, who actually measured the amount of light inside the mask. And it was zero.
Yeah. Well, even if there's a little light there, if it doesn't carry an image, it doesn't help. Now, here was an example. We had a blind guy come in the course. This is a blind guy who had taken the course and learned how to see. Well, he was blind. And he comes to, you know, we talk about justification. So I asked him, I said, well, how do you do that? And he says, oh, I feel it. I can feel it in my fingertips. So what he did is somebody picked a book up. They had a bookshelf back there. Somebody randomly picks up a book, and it was a children's picture book. And they give it to the guy, and the guy opens it up. And he starts to put his fingers on it. And as he moves his fingers, you see, he can read and he can say, oh, here's a giraffe. And down here is this and that. And it's yellow. And he's telling us the colors and what's on the book. And then he turns the book around to show us the pages. And he couldn't do it unless he touched it. You see, with his fingers. He says he sees it with his fingers. That was just his justification. That was his own tool. He could have seen it without his fingers. His fingers had nothing to do with it. But in his own mind, he justified it as he was seeing it, you know, through his fingertips. And, you know, so people justify it in all sorts of ways. But if they don't have any justification for it, generally they can't do it. So
exactly. So I think it's basically what you're saying. It's about the belief, because you're justifying with your belief. Well, I can't do it completely this way, but if I touch it that way, then I can do it, even though it doesn't make sense. So, but all this to say, and I hope that that's what I accomplished in the film, is to demonstrate that with your ability to change your mind or find a justification or a belief system, you can even see completely blindfolded. You can change the pH in water. You can. And so, do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Anybody, everybody has the potential to do these things.
Yes.
You know, we in our culture, we value the left brain, the logical processing side of our brain. And we develop that since starting in kindergarten. You know, we start memorizing things, memorize the alphabet, memorize numbers, learn how to do math. And we develop and develop and develop that logical side, that left hemisphere. But on the right hemisphere, we have our intuitive side, and we do nothing, almost nothing to develop it. So that left side is just left fallow. And all of these paranormal things have to work through that right side. They all are intuitive. They all come through the intuitive side. Yeah, so here we are, very sophisticated intellectually, and like babies, you know, like 2-year-olds on our intuitive side, we just never learn to develop it. But the astounding thing is that if you do develop it, that intuitive side becomes just as accurate, just as repeatable, just as reliable as the intellectual side. But because we never develop it, we think, that's intuition. Yeah, it could be right, could be wrong. I got this gut feeling, but half the time, you know, they're wrong, and we don't trust it. That's because we've never developed it. If we never developed our intellectual side, that also wouldn't work very well. But, you know, we spend years and years doing it. Anybody could develop their intuitive side. Now, adults have the additional problem is that their intellectual side wants to be in charge. Wants to take over, wants to assess everything and analyze it and judge it. And that then takes them right out of that intuitive side. So
Right.
the first thing they have to learn is to make that intellect sit down and be quiet. And that's a very hard thing for most people to do.
Yeah, but with a little bit of training, like I said, like we have exercises, I teach a meditation that gets you out of your mind. That's very specific. It's not just any meditation.
Yeah.
And so just because so if you train yourself, in fact, I'm going to send you, if you're interested, I'll send you the several things that we did, take a look, but if you like, but the point is, and how do we, that's what I was trying to do in the movie, is to show the many different ways that you can be empowered again to just be intuitive and just try it. Like your mind is free, it's like just give it a try. Do it once, do it twice, and see how. And in the classes, people end up like, wait, I just moved it a little bit. Okay, so build on that. Before you know it, you can do all of this. So
Yes.
But at the end of the day, this tells us that we have an effect on our physical body and our physical reality. We have a measurable effect. That is the point. So if we were to use that, those demonstrations, those experiments, and the theories that this is real, and apply it to today's problem, okay? Here we are. We say, how did we get into this mess? And of course, individual units of consciousness are thinking the probability or the possibility of a virus is nothing new. So it was already part of the system of the probability. But why is it, or how is it, that enough people created that reality for others in a way? And how can we use our individual unit of consciousness to shift not just our reality, but the collective? What do you think?
Okay. I said that if I'm trying to make it not rain on next Saturday, and other people are trying to make it rain, the
Right.
push and the pull, depends on who pushes and who pulls the hardest. Well,
So
if
now
we
we're
look-
right.
if we look around at this reality we have, and we look around at this mess, as you say, and it's full of greed and full of nastiness and full of self-centeredness and on and on and on, arrogance, and we see all of that. Well, that is a very accurate representation of the quality of our collective consciousness. That is how we humans are, and that's what we've created. So when we look at this mess, that's us. We're the mess. And how do we fix it? The way we fix it is by fixing ourselves. You can't help anybody else. You can't make anybody else grow up and let go of that meanness, that fear, that self-centeredness, those beliefs, ego. You can't get anybody to do that. It has to be from the inside out. So the only person that you can really change is yourself. But if you change yourself, you will help change other people, just because we have this collective consciousness thing going on as well. And if you change yourself, then the people around you will kind of be pulled up a little bit just because they're around you. And it works the opposite way. If you have a bunch of people who are very angry, well, we call that a mob. And that mob will do things that are uglier and meaner than any of the people in it would have done on their own. You see, it's that anger starts to be self-reinforcing. They pick up on each other's anger, which makes them even angrier, which makes them even angrier. And so you can drag people down or pull people up based on whether you're angry and negative or whether you're full of caring and love and positive attitudes. So just having a positive attitude is what will solve these problems. And if we can grow up to the point that we increase our quality of consciousness, which means we're more caring, we are more sensitive to other people. It's about other, not just about us. We get rid of our beliefs. We get rid of our ego, our self-centeredness. Then all the institutions, the politics, the corporations, all the institutions out there will straighten themselves up because they're just a reflection of us. And as us changes, they will change automatically. So a bad political system or a bad economic system is a symptom, not a cause. The cause is the low quality of consciousness among the people. That's the cause. So when we change, everything else will change. We've got this idea of work on the not on the cause, but on the symptom. And that's not helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I always get asked that question. So I'm curious what you think of it. Is it possible? It sounds that the majority of the people have created this reality. More of the people wanted it to rain, and less people wanted it for the sun to come out. So we get that. But do you think that then it takes a kind of, is it a number issue? Do we need more people thinking we want the sun to shine, we want the virus to go away in order for it to go away? Or is it the strength of the consciousness projecting the intent? In other words, you could have 3 people versus 7 billion, but if those 3 people can override or not, because their focused intent is more powerful. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
Which is it, do you think?
It's both.
Okay.
If they both work together. For instance, if you have, let's say we have 10 people and they're all about the same strength at healing.
Right.
Okay? So if you have one person, tries to heal somebody, then they'll put that one strength into doing that. If all 10 work together on it, then you'll have 10 times the effect. In other words, it's additive. But besides being additive, which means more numbers, also each individual can be more or less effective. And so each individual can be more or less powerful in what they contribute. So an individual who's very powerful may contribute more than 100 people who are not powerful at all.
Okay.
So it works both ways. So the way you get to be more powerful is you need to develop that intuitive side. You need to be able to get your consciousness such that it's not random. You don't have all these thoughts going through it. You have to be able to settle your mind and hold that in a still space. That's what you learn to do when you meditate, right? You learn to keep your mind in that still, calm space. You have to have an intent that is very clear. You have to have a focus that is very strong. And you get that strength by actually caring about what you're doing. In other words, if you just sit there and say, okay, thing, twirl around, nothing's going to happen. You have to really want it to twirl around. In other words, you have to put oomph in it. You have to put power in it by your intention to be that way. Same if you're healing. If you just are casual going through the motions of the healing, you won't be very powerful. But if you really care about that person, you really want to heal them because you care about them, you'll be a lot more powerful. So people can be more or less powerful depending on how well they can, I hate to use the word control, but how well they can control their minds.
Master.
So they're not, master. Yeah, how well they can master their own consciousness. Because most of us our energy is just going like this all over the place, right? So you have to bring all that down and focus it on a point to just what you want done. And if you can do that, then you will be more powerful. If you can't do that, then you're not so powerful. So it's both. People can be more or less powerful, but more people are additive.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And by the way, we have, I want to talk to you about so many things. I want to monopolize your time because you're so fascinating the way you answer the question. I want to talk to you about divinity. I want to talk to you spirituality. I want to talk to you all kinds, but there's so much time, I'm so happy that you're here. And I want to see if we can answer a couple questions for the folks so we don't, take up too much time. So Michael, who's here with me and with Tom, is actually looking at all your comments and all your questions on Facebook and everywhere else. Do we have any questions for Tom or myself right now? Yes, I'm sure we have lots of questions. I just didn't want to interrupt you because it's such a fascinating conversation. Yeah, go ahead, Tom, Michael.
Exactly. Fortunately, Tom answered a few of them along the way that were some really profound answers to the questions. We have fans watching all around the world, not only on Caroline's Facebook page, on YouTube, We have a watch party going on Tom's My Big Pro website. His amazing team of assistants is getting the word out there, so I've been putting links in the chat. I just wanted to say real quickly, Caroline, you nailed it. It was at Stanford's website for the cellular automated data. That's also in the links in the chat if everyone wants to watch that later.
Good.
This question's for Tom, and bear with me, I need to get back to the correct Facebook page. And I'm going to combine two of them because I think it will work. Could consciousness be auto or self-created? In other words, can the computer also be a player?
That's a question about, can a computer ever become conscious? And the answer to that is yes, of course, a computer can become conscious. But that is not to say that a computer will become just like a human being. You see, but they can become conscious. To become conscious, you have to be able to make free will choices, which means the computer cannot just be run by algorithms. You know, if this, then that. If the computer is just following instructions, it will never be conscious. But we have ways of making neural networks, and neural networks, if we make particularly an array of neural networks that make up a larger neural network, made up of smaller neural networks, then we can end up with a computer that has free will choice. In other words, it just looks at the choice and it has free will to pick A or B or C, if those are three possibilities. And it picks them for its own reasons. And the other thing it has to have is it has to have a purpose. So it knows how to pick a choice. Why pick A rather than B or C? Well, you have to have a purpose. What's your goal? Will A get you to your goal better, or will C? So purpose gives you direction. So you have to have that. So a computer can have that. Now, let's say we have a computer and we somehow get it to have that free will with this network of neural nets, and it becomes conscious. It's going to become conscious within the confines of its self. It's limited by its avatar. The avatar is actually the physical machine. It's the chips and the memory and the thing that makes up the computer. That's its body. Its consciousness, just like all consciousness, is non-physical. Okay, now how does that work? How that works is when this computer has the ability to serve as an avatar for some individuated unit of consciousness, an individuated unit of consciousness will log on and play that computer as its avatar. But before the individuated unit of consciousness will log on, that computer has to have significant choices. Make it worthwhile. You see, something with some moral value. It has to have some sets of choices that are interesting to consciousness. And if you get a computer that has those attributes, has free will, okay, it has memory, obviously, it has processing, it has feedback, all it needs then is interesting choices. And if its choices are interesting, some IUOC, individuated unit of consciousness, will say, I'll log on to that avatar. And now it's conscious. And it's conscious just like we are. It's just got a different avatar. So you take that computer and you pull its plug out, its consciousness doesn't go away, or you smash it. Its consciousness doesn't give away. Consciousness is forever. Consciousness is immortal. That consciousness is still there. It can log back on to some other computer or anything else, but it will be adapted to that computer's worldview, not to a human worldview. Now, eventually, maybe those two will merge. But we already have in universities computers that are conscious at a very low level. I've seen computers conscious maybe the level of an insect.
You mean that AI or like quantum computers?
No, just regular old computers.
Oh.
And we've had this for decades where the computer will react, let's say, just like a spider would react to something. Now, you can say, is a spider conscious? Well, if it has free will choices, if it has several things that it can do and it can pick one non-algorithmically, not just an if-then statement, but it actually considers and has free will to make the choice, then it's conscious. But its consciousness is very limited. You see, it doesn't have the capacity that we have. It doesn't have the abilities that we have. So things can be conscious on all sorts of levels. You know, dogs and cats and horses are all conscious. You know, raccoons and bumblebees are conscious. So now, how far down that list of things that are conscious you can go? Well, that's another question, because it gets hard to tell sometimes. Is something making a choice, or is it just hardwired? If it's hardwired, it's not conscious. So if you got a clam and its foot out and you touch its foot and it jerks its foot back in, well, was that because it decided to do that, or because it's just an if-then statement in its DNA someplace that says if something touches your foot, you jerk the foot in? You see, so things, sometimes we don't know whether they're conscious or not. And then you have things like trees. Are trees conscious? Well, trees seem to be aware, but I don't know that they actually have free will choices. So until that can be demonstrated, then they're just aware. But now we know about the roots and the fungi and the chemicals that we know a whole lot about that, but whether that's algorithmic or not, I don't think we're sure yet. We haven't yet seen signs that show us that they are definitely free will choices. They may just be hardwired in the DNA, but maybe, we don't know. You know, we may find out that they are conscious. Right. So anything conscious, you know, has a IUOC playing it. So it plays a bumblebee, you know, or maybe a whole hive, or maybe 100 hives of bumblebees. You know, you have somewhere there's an IUOC playing those entities at that level. So all IUOCs are not like human. Some of them are like bumblebees.
So fascinating. Okay, maybe we'll take one more question so we can let Tom go. But I mean, we can just keep going for a very long time with this level of conversation and depth. Go ahead, Michael. Is there anything else for Tom?
Could you elaborate a little bit more on the right brain method that we use in terms of mystical or alien or other experiences that aren't on that more analytical side?
You mean how to shift from right brain to left brain, or what exactly is the question?
No, just how would we explain the experiences that we have if someone has a paranormal or a ghost or a UFO type experience or a fairy type experience, something that's outside of the normal realm of consciousness? Right.
Okay. And what is the question exactly? Did you understand?
Yeah, I think I got enough of it to give an answer. You know, when we experience something that is very unusual, all experience is you receiving a data stream. Okay, the computer sends you a data stream, and you interpret that data to be an experience, and that experience then is your reality. So your interpretation of the data you get is your reality. Now, the computer could send two different people the same data and get two different interpretations. So you'd have, you know, each person would have a little different reality. All of us walk around in our own reality. So it's a virtual reality. A virtual reality is information-based. So if you see a little green man with pointy ears standing at the foot of your bed in the morning when you wake up, that's because that's the way you've interpreted the data that the system is sending to you. Now, it can send you data for multiple reasons. One, you know, it's an interactive multiplayer game. There is some little green man with pointy ears, you know, who's interacting with you. Or the computer may just send you that image just to help waken you up and let you know that reality is a lot stranger and more magnificent than just this stuff. You know, that it's a bigger world than just this stuff. And it does that a lot just to wake people up. It gives them very unusual things to see, because then they start looking on the internet. Oh, you know, green guys, you know, at the foot of beds, you know, anybody else had that experience? And pretty soon they become seekers, quote unquote. And then they start growing up and they start evolving the quality of their consciousness. So the system will often send strange data to people if the system thinks they're ready to wake up, become seekers, and then grow up. So that's often what's going on. And it could be 10 people all standing at the same place when the flying saucer comes over, and all 10 of them will see it. That just means that all 10 of them got a data stream, and they all 10 will interpret it in their own way. And they will all agree that, yep, there was a flying saucer there. We saw it. It stopped, it landed, then it took off again. So
yeah, that's so interesting, because then I wonder also how many people get influenced by other people, reading about other people's experience, and then the next time they would see a green little guy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's where the interpretation comes in. Exactly. You see, if you get something and you don't really know how to interpret it, you're going to interpret it as best you can, a pattern match to what you already know. And if what you already know is a little green guys with pointy ears, that's what you'll interpret the data as, and that's what you'll see.
But let me ask you this, Tom. So if, per your model, if we are creating the reality, but there's already a probable outcome, can we know the future when we ask the question, or up to how much in the future can we know as a certainty? And beyond that point, you can never know because it hasn't been created yet. For example, let's be very specific. Okay. People ask the question, will this virus go away? We know eventually it will, so because that's part of the probability. But if you're trying to pinpoint, can it be gone in a month or 2 months, you know, something like that? How far in the future can you see for sure something that has already created enough momentum?
Okay. Well, first of all, you'll never know for certain. You'll never know for sure. There are no for sures. The future is all probability. And that probability is constantly changing based on the choices that we make. So if we make choices like everybody distances themselves and wears a mask when they go out, then if they get the disease, they quarantine themselves, then the probability of how long that is going to last will start to come down. It's going to be, you know, the probability that it's shorter will start getting greater. If we do the opposite, you know, if we just don't care and we don't take any precautions, then the probability that it's going to last longer goes up. So we changing those probabilities. It's the future is just a probable future. It's not fixed. And those probabilities change minute by minute as people make choices. So it's a collective, all of us, you know, it's the collective, all the choices that we make. That's what we get. Now you can look at it right now and say, okay, given the way everything has happened right to now, what's the probability? Is it going to last for another year or another 5 years? And you can get that answer. But that's just the way the probability is now. You know? Tomorrow, that's going to be different. You know, and then the next day it's going to be different again. So so you can get it, yes, now, but it's not for certain because we're all making free will choices, and that changes everything.
Yeah, which again brings to the conclusion that everything that you put out, you know, every choice that you make, even though you think you may be insignificant, you're still part of the system. You're still part of the collective. So every choice that you are making is making a difference. And that's what, again, I demonstrated in the film the entire time. Your mind, your focus on a target does have a measurable effect. So if there's one takeaway at the end of this incredible conversation, is to bring it back to you. And no matter what the collective is doing, whatever the system is throwing at you, it never takes away from your ability to decide as free will how the information that you want to put out in the system. So I'm hoping that's what the people will take away, not just from this conversation, but from the movie as well. So, okay, well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Tom, I just love everything about you and everything you're doing. And by the way, because we've been working for all kinds of doing all these experiments and doing all these techniques and with many people, actually, if you need like any sort of if you want to test with people, you know, because I know you're doing your own experiments, let me know. Maybe we can do something like that as well to test, you know, is this a repeatable experiment and how we can do that. But is there something you'd like to say today before we wrap this up?
Well, I guess one other thing that I've been involved in lately that is probably worth mentioning, and that is, you know, as I said before, that I could derive quantum mechanics and make it a rational science, not a weird science, but just a logical science like any other science. And when I do that, I come up with a solution to what physicists call the measurement problem. Why is it you need an observer? Why does the observer change how that double slit experiment works? And my idea about that is different than the idea that present day quantum mechanics has. So it's a different idea. So I explain it, and my explanation actually supports and describes what was called, well, no, we got it. It was the first understanding of how quantum mechanics worked. I'll get that in just a second.
The observer paradox.
Yeah, it was the Denmark. What's the city in Denmark? Copenhagen. The Copenhagen.
Oh, right.
Called the Copenhagen interpretation. It really wasn't an interpretation at all. It was what the scientists got together at Copenhagen. Here's what we did, and here were our results. It wasn't an interpretation. It was an explanation of the results. And my theory explains the Copenhagen theory. In other words, it explains the Copenhagen results that they got. Meanwhile, our physics has strayed from that. They've kind of let go of that Copenhagen idea, and they've done it some other way. You know, they explain the results some other way. So I've come up with some quantum mechanics experiments that will say, does it work this way or does it work that way? The way my theory says that it should work and the way present physics says it should work. And I've got those ongoing in a lab in Southern California at Pomona, the Polytech, California Polytech at Pomona.
Right.
And we're going to find out, hopefully, in some months as those experiments get done. So, yes, this is real science. It's not just hand-waving science, and it's not just coming up with big ideas that, you know, aren't proven or not proven, but it turns out that we've got physics going on now in the lab, just straight physics, has nothing to do with mind or intentions, just straight physics problems. And it will show up either my theory's got it right or their theory's got it right. So either way, I'm going to learn something. So I'm really anxious to see how that works. So that's something that your more technical listeners might find interesting. Absolutely. And I wrote a paper. I published a paper on it in a physics journal, I don't know, a year or so ago, and that's available too.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to know everything you're doing. And there's a lot of folks and scientists and people who are very technical who are following this and interested to know. But are you saying that you are changing the results of the double slit experiment? Not changing, but you're bringing a new interpretation to that experiment?
Actually, I'm explaining an old interpretation. The Copenhagen interpretation, like I say, it wasn't an interpretation, it was just results.
Right.
And now, because those results said that this cannot be a materialistic reality, and that didn't go down very well with the scientists, so they have figured out a way that they can still have their materialistic reality.
I see.
By denying what the Copenhagen results were. And my theory, my theory basically backs up the Copenhagen results.
Yeah.
So now we're going to see whether they actually do the experiment and see which one's right. So that's kind of where it's going. So this year definitely we'll have something on that, and if it does, then that will show that physics today, traditional physics, has gone off on a wrong tangent. They are misinterpreting things. Their quantum physics is not correct. And that will be a big deal in science if that turns out that way.
Well, it will be groundbreaking. I mean,
yes.
How close are you? Like, do you think within this year? I mean, that's
yes, well, I think within this year. Yeah, we have a contract with Cal Polytech that lasts through December, and I think before then we'll have some results.
I am so excited. I would love, so I'm sure you will be sharing it, but I would love for you to also come back when you have time and speak with us even more about that experiment and everything else that you're doing. And
anybody'd like to know something about it, it's under CUSAC.org. I stood up an organization, CUSAC, Center for the Unification of Science and Consciousness.
Okay,
and I got money from crowdfunding, and that's what's paying for these scientists to do the work. And anybody wants to go to CUSAC.org, they can find out all about it right there.
And we're going to put the link in the description and in the comments for everybody to see and know where to go to follow you, to follow your research. I can't wait to hear about that. So, all right, guys. So I am so grateful for your time today. We already just put it in the chat, and we'll put it in the description. And also, again, just to wrap this up, Tom is in the film. It was so much fun filming with you also. So if you want to watch him in the film as well, go to superhumanfilm.com. And once again, I just want to thank you and thank everybody for being here with us. And I hope to see you again. I hope to do this again at some point in the future.
Well, sure. It's been a lot of fun, Caroline, and appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. The shoot was fun. The whole thing everything's fun. You know, life is just fun. And I'm having a good time. So let's do it again. If the audience would like to hear more, then we'll do it again.
Absolutely. We definitely want to hear more. This audience is all about this. How does it work? How do we work? How is it all connected? And so we definitely want to have you back. So we'll be in touch. And thank you so much, especially if you've made progress on your experiments. I definitely want to know. We want to put it out there whenever you're ready. Okay?
Okay.
All right, my dear. Thanks so much. And thanks everybody for joining. And I hope to see you again next time. Thank you so much.